Welcome to Playback, Tier 2 World's weekly showcase of our best stories from around the globe. Coming up, a special report from Kabul about how the Turkish Red Crescent is helping Afghans get through one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. The Canadian capital remains clogged with trucks in protest against mandatory COVID-19 health measures. A debate over the headscarf in South India sparks protests across the state of Karnataka.
Does he think the war will end soon?
And an exclusive report from the Ukrainian border on how frontline soldiers are handling the crisis and heavy diplomacy traffic. While U.S. President Joe Biden has warned all American citizens to leave Ukraine over concerns about Russian military action, Biden says he won't be able to evacuate nationals if Moscow invades. A lot is riding on diplomatic maneuvering during de-escalation talks, but as Liz Maddock reports, there's no breakthrough to cite to end the 8-year separation conflict in eastern Ukraine.
Ukraine is mirroring Russia, launching its own military drills. Both sides are trying to show their strength, but the West sees the first shots fired by Russia as a military escalation. And the US has urged its citizens to leave Ukraine immediately.
What I've asked is American citizens should leave now. We're dealing with one of the largest armies in the world. This is a very different situation and things could go crazy quickly.
Biden says there's no scenario where he would consider sending in US troops to rescue Americans.
That's a world war. When Americans and Russians start shooting at one another, we're in a very different world than we've ever been in.
The US promises it's still committed to do everything it can to defend Ukraine. Secretary of State Antony Blinken is in Australia for Quad talks. Together with India and Japan, the bloc is supposed to be focusing on countering Chinese aggression. But the Ukraine crisis has dominated talks and headlines.
If Russia chooses to renew its aggression against Ukraine, we've made clear, not just us, but countries throughout Europe and even beyond, that there'll be massive consequences. So my hope is that Russia will be deterred by the actions that we've taken to bring together many countries that stand against renewed aggression by Russia and Ukraine.
Biden warns that things could go crazy quickly if crisis talks in Berlin fail. 9 hours of talks on Thursday failed to yield a breakthrough.
Yes, we had disagreements. Yes, there are issues which have to be coordinated, but there is a will to continue and negotiate.
The Ukrainian position is uncompromising. We hope the Ukrainian Authority will be wise enough not to launch combat action against their own citizens on the other side of the contact line.
It will take far more diplomatic manoeuvring to bring ending stability to the troubled region. Liz Maddock, TRT World.
Tier 2 World's Sarah Firth has been with frontline soldiers to get their thoughts on the conflict and international diplomacy and sends us this exclusive report.
After 8 years of fighting separatists on these front lines, we've come to find out how some of these soldiers feel right now about the threat of a full Russian invasion. I'm angry, Dennis tells us. Russians can't come to my house with their rules, he says. It's like me going to my neighbor and saying, hey, you must live under my rules. As diplomats gather in Moscow and Kiev for dinners and meetings to talk de-escalation, this is the daily reality for those on the front line. It's normal, Dennis reassures us to the sound of gunfire. It's diplomats. A soldier shows us around his living quarters. The situation here has not changed for years, he tells us. Let it all be over now, he says, and we can all go home. But how to end this war, we ask? Just knock out the Russian-backed separatists and that's it. Take what's ours. How else, he says. How many boys have died here in this war? Does he think the war will end soon? Ukraine has been getting military support from its allies. Talks are of de-escalation, but the actions on all sides tell a different story. Is there anything you want the world to know right now, we ask? World, please, no more protracted diplomacy, Dennis says. That kind of diplomacy doesn't lead to anything good. Is it too late for diplomacy? It hasn't worked for 8 years, he answers bluntly. Enough diplomacy. Having faced Russian aggression for so many years, though the threat seems now greater than ever, these soldiers' motivation remains the same. They fight, they tell us, for their mothers, their sisters, their families, their territory, their home. Sarah Firth, TRT World, Donbass Frontlines, Ukraine.
Let's now look at some of the stories that made headlines over the week. The Center for Strategic and International Studies says the site was identified using satellite photos. It's in northern Chegang province, about 25 kilometers from the Chinese border. The report says the site is likely one of approximately 20 ballistic missile bases that have never been declared by North Korea. It went on to say that while there was no sign of an ICBM unit at the base, the site was active and appeared to be well maintained. The Tunisian Justice Minister says President Kais Saied will not dissolve the Supreme Judicial Council, but will change the law regulating it and will set up a temporary authority in the meantime. Said's announcement on Sunday that he would dissolve the body, which guarantees judicial independence, prompted immediate criticism, including from Tunisia's main Western donors. The Israeli government is expected to set up a commission of inquiry to examine reports police have used spyware to hack the phones of Israeli public figures without authorization. Officials, protesters, journalists, activists, and even a son of former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu were among those targeted. The Israeli surveillance firm NSO has previously faced allegations that its hacking software Pegasus has been misused by authoritarian governments across the world. France has launched a new body in an attempt to reshape how Muslims practice Islam in the country. Known as the Forum of Islam, the government chose influential Muslim figures in the country to be part of the group to lead the community, in an attempt to rid the religion of extremism. However, critics condemn the project, accusing President Emmanuel Macron of trying to gain right-wing support ahead of April's presidential election. Moving on to India now, and protests over the right to wear hijab in educational institutions have spread across the southern Indian state of Karnataka, forcing schools and universities to close for 3 days. The tensions erupted after a group of Muslim girls were suspended from school for wearing the headscarf. The issue is now being debated in a high court, which has appealed for peace until a decision is made. Simita Sharma reports from New Delhi.
What began as a question about school dress codes has flared into a tense fight over religious freedom. 6 female students in the town of Udupi in Karnataka first argued they have the right to wear hijabs to class, and the school's decision to suddenly ban the headscarves sparked outrage.
Respected you, sir. This is what we are getting right now. When we had joined the college first, in that college rules books, they mentioned we can wear a hijab and there is no restrictions about hijab. Then again, suddenly, why they are telling about we should not wear a hijab? We should not come to college by wearing hijab. Why?
The state government has told schools they must have an equal policy for all students. But several Hindutva groups say if the hijab is allowed inside the classroom, they will respond by wearing their own religious symbols. Several of the pro-hijab protests have been spearheaded by the Campus Front of India, the student movement affiliated with the Islamist Popular Front of India. They argue that not allowing students into classrooms because they wear a hijab is a violation of their constitutional rights and freedoms. The Karnataka High Court is now hearing the case.
We will enter the classroom wearing our hijabs. We will not remove the hijabs until we receive an order from the High Court.
The coastal region around Karnataka has seen increasing polarization. In addition to protests, there have been reports of segregation in some classrooms and violent scuffles on the street. And there are fears that these tensions could only worsen if a resolution isn't found soon.
Public opinion is divided. Some argue that schools and colleges should be free from religion. Others believe that the right to education must be protected regardless of what a student chooses to wear. The court decision could set legal precedents that reach beyond Karnataka at a time when another Indian state, Madhya Pradesh, has said it will ban the hijab. Smita Sharma, TRT World, New Delhi.
Well, meanwhile, India's neighbor Afghanistan has welcomed Turkey's Goodness train carrying almost 750 tons of humanitarian aid on February 7. Taliban's acting foreign minister has called on Ankara to help the country grow its international trade, so it's not so dependent on foreign aid. Amir Khan Muttaqi made the comments while meeting with the head of the Turkish Red Crescent, who is there to assess the humanitarian crisis. Soraya Lenny reports from Kabul.
It's a relationship that dates back to the First World War, Turkish-Afghan ties in times of conflict and peace, and now during one of the world's largest humanitarian crises.
Last 20 years, we could send almost 10 million US dollar worth of humanitarian good to Afghanistan, and we could reach almost 2.1 million people in need in Afghanistan.
While major donors like the United States and the EU packed up after the Taliban takeover in August, the Turkish Red Crescent continued its mission, says its boss Kerem Kunik, who is on a 3-day visit to Afghanistan.
Actually, we have to look at Afghan people, innocent civilians here. Because of the drought, because of the hostilities, because of the political happenings, many sanctions, many BCH, many problems in front of us to reach people.
Here, handing out aid packages to those in need, like Shapur.
From the beginning of winter to now, I have come here 2 or 3 times to get aid.
Shapur is a bootmaker and was not well off by any standards. But the collapse of the currency and 500,000 job losses has plunged him into poverty.
I had no need before, but it's winter and cold. I'm forced to. But we pray once again for the sake of our Islamic country.
Each box contains essential items, for example, cooking oil. There's also rice, there's also green tea, tomato paste, pasta. There's even biscuits, and it may not seem like a lot, but this is enough to get one Afghan family through the week.
More is on the way. The Turkish Kindness train carrying 748 tons of humanitarian aid will arrive in Herat this week. Despite the generosity, the Taliban's acting foreign minister wants Afghanistan to end its aid dependency.
We have many goods here in Kabul. Sending the aid from Turkey will be expensive for Turkey. I would suggest that you send money instead of shipping goods, so that there are 2 advantageous sides for the Afghan people. That also boosts the economy.
But Afghanistan's new rulers face an uphill challenge. US sanctions, a ban on international banking transfers, and no international recognition are scaring off major investors, leaving aid as a short-term solution to a long-term crisis.
We continue with some coronavirus stories that made headlines during the week. Starting with Australia, after almost 2 years of closed borders, the country is set to reopen on the 21st of February. All travelers with valid visas will be allowed to enter the country on condition that they are fully vaccinated, except for Western Australia, which will be the only state to remain closed to all domestic and international travel. And to Canada now, the United States has called on Canada to use federal powers to end the border blockade by truckers protesting coronavirus restrictions. The convoy, which has shut down Canada's capital, is causing havoc with supply chains in both countries. Our correspondent Andy Rosegen has the latest from Ottawa.
Don't forget your other homework, though, your other homework.
Since the truckers' convoy arrived in Ottawa, Bernita Peterson has been at the microphone.
Please give Osama a warm, warm welcome.
She says she lost her job due to a vaccine mandate. She then started a group opposed to vaccine mandates and COVID-19 restrictions.
Canada is uniting right now, and it is such a beautiful thing.
But some truckers continue to block North America's busiest border crossing between the U.S. and Canada since Monday, closing multiple auto plants on both sides of the border and resulting in worker layoffs.
Well, thus far, it's starting to spread. And if it keeps going, everybody I talk to says that it's going to get worse and it's going to start affecting more U.S. plants.
On top of that, downtown Ottawa is entering its third week of gridlock.
Using their trucks as like blockades, and it's basically they're using it as a weapon.
It's now time to step up and take action. There may be people who are uncomfortable with the actions of the protesters. However, this work has to be done.
Authorities say they are still looking for a diplomatic way to end the standoff at the border crossing and in downtown Ottawa. But Ottawa's police have also accused protesters of jamming 911 phone lines to send police scrambling on fake emergency calls. And some Canadian lawmakers are calling for the legislature to reconvene now to tackle the protest and to start getting tougher on the truckers by revoking their commercial licenses. One of the leaders of this protest is promising more truckers to arrive here in Ottawa in the coming days, maybe about 1,000. The mayor of Ottawa is promising more police officers here in the coming days, maybe up to 2,000. So the questions remain, when will this end and how will this end? Andy Rosegen, TRT World, Ottawa, Canada.
In New Zealand, hundreds of protesters have also been demonstrating against vaccine mandates and pandemic measures outside the parliament. Many have camped outside the Parliament's building and have vowed to stay until restrictions are lifted. New Zealand has imposed strict COVID-19 curbs to contain the virus and has managed to keep case numbers and deaths relatively low. From New Zealand to China now, the first week of the Winter Olympics lived up to expectations with massive upsets on the ice as well as some surprise champions. Tier 2 World's Adal Halim recaps week 1 from Beijing.
Norway is the most successful country in Winter Olympics history, and the Nordic country got off to a golden start here at Beijing 2022. Therese Johaug won the first gold of these games with a dominant victory in the 15-kilometer cross-country skiing race in the women's skiathlon. 5 days later, she won her second gold in the women's 10K Classic. The Norwegians are the reigning world champions, and in fact, Norway set the record for most total medals at a single Winter Olympics with 39 at the 2018 Olympics in Pyeongchang. She's already the most decorated Olympic speed skater of all time, and now Irene Wust is the first athlete to win an individual gold medal in 5 Olympics. The Dutch speed skater won the 1500-meter race on Monday, beating Japan's Miho Takagi, the world record holder, in a nail-biter. Wust was just 19 when she won her first gold in Turin in 2006. Her 6th gold brings her total medal count to 12 overall. The 35-year-old is the oldest speed skater to win Olympic gold and said she plans to retire after Beijing. Home crowd favorite Eileen Gu has captured the hearts of the Chinese public. The teen skiing sensation, also known as the Snow Princess, won gold medal in the women's free ski big air competition. The American-born Gu, whose mother is from China, decided to compete for Team China at Beijing 2022, much to the delight of her fans in the crowd and on Chinese social media. The 18-year-old's popularity had already soared leading up to these games, but her performance on Tuesday nearly broke the internet, temporarily crashing China's Twitter-like platform Weibo due to the millions of users celebrating Gu's victory. And Turkey's Furkan Akar got close to the podium in his Olympic debut. The short-track speed skater finished 6th in the 1,000-meter finals on Monday. The 19-year-old from Erzurum was one of 2 Turkish flag bearers at the opening ceremony. There are 7 Turkish athletes here in Beijing hoping to bring home the country's first ever medal at the Winter Olympics.
We continue with some of the stories that reveal the devastating impact of the climate crisis, starting with Madagascar, reeling for 2 cyclones in just 2 weeks. Both storms killed close to 150 people, and the United Nations is warning of a growing humanitarian crisis on the island country. Around 140,000 people have been displaced by Cyclone Batsirai and Cyclone Ana, both storms destroying several towns and villages. The UN warns the numbers of casualties is expected to rise, with half of the victims likely to be children. Meanwhile, a recent report claims that many of the world's biggest companies are allegedly failing to fulfill their pledges on tackling the climate crisis. The New Climate Institute says Google, Amazon, IKEA, Apple, and Nestle aren't meeting targets on reducing their environmental impact. The report also accuses the companies of routinely exaggerating and misreporting their progress. A new study has shown that climate change is causing the world's highest glacier on Mount Everest to melt rapidly. Scientists at the University of Maine say that the glacier has lost 54 meters of thickness in the last 25 years. The glacier is said to be melting 80 times faster and is caused by warming temperatures and strong winds. And scientists at the Joint European Torus in England have made a major breakthrough in their quest to develop nuclear fusion, the reaction that powers the stars. The hope is that fusion could one day help address climate change by providing a safe and green source of energy. Scientists generated energy for 5 seconds during an experiment, more than doubling a 1997 record. They say that's about the same power needed to power 35,000 homes for 5 seconds. In one of the poorest agriculture regions of California, an innovative electric car ride-sharing program shuttles residents all over the region free of charge. The zero-emissions vehicles are part of a nonprofit program that's become an indispensable tool for low-income migrant workers. Tier 2 World's Martin Markovits reports.
California's Central Valley produces a quarter of the United States' food output. But access to transportation for its low-income farm workers and their families has always been a major issue.
This region feeds the whole country, and yet we're very, very neglected. With this service, we help people that don't have access to medical care or to transportation to their medical care.
Which is why the Green Raiteros ride-sharing program has become a lifeline for migrant farm workers like Don Goyo. Twice a week, Areli Arellano drives him to his dialysis appointment free of charge in an all-electric Chevy Bolt. The closest clinic is 32 kilometers away.
If we didn't have this service, his wife would have to, stop working. He had to stop working, so that's already one loss of income. We can't afford for his wife, to lose her income as well.
The electric ride-sharing program is a brainchild of Ray Leon, the mayor of the poor farming town of Huron.
Like many other rural farm worker communities, we are geographically isolated. Therefore, the electric vehicles become extremely handy in being able to bridge the gap between where the farm workers live and where the medical services are.
Inspired by migrant workers seeking and offering rides decades ago, Mayor Leon has helped transform this agricultural town of just over 6,000 people into the greenest farm worker community in the United States.
The Green Rateros are funded for the most part by grants from California's environmental programs. Those in turn are funded by industrial polluters. Passengers who want to ride just have to book it a few days in advance, and after that, they can use the service as much as they like.
Mayor Leon is the son of farm workers himself and wants to expand this ride service across the Central and San Joaquin Valley.
The San Joaquin Valley is one of the most contaminated air basins in the nation, next to LA. And the future is electric. The future is about technologies that are renewable.
But due to lack of funding, the service is in danger. Mayor Leon is seeking more funds from other areas, including the Biden administration, which has vowed to invest in more green transportation for low-income communities. But even if funding is limited, Mayor Leon says he will find a way to continue giving free rides to those who have come to depend on the Green Raiteros. Martin Markovits, TRT World, Huron, California.
Well, that rounds up your week of news here on Playback. Stay tuned to TRT World for the latest stories. But before we leave, we bring you a festival all about art and light that's transforming the Danish capital.